Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Walpert. Chapter 21, New Delhi, 1947. The Mountbattens flew up to Simla for a week's holiday, taking Nehru and his daughter Indira as house guests. Having made real friends with Nehru during his stay here, Mountbatten wired his Chief of Staff, Lord Ismay. I asked him whether he would look at the London draft of the plan for voting on partition as an act of friendship, and on the understanding that he would not utilize his prior knowledge or mention to his colleagues that he had seen it. He readily gave this undertaking and took the draft to bed. Next morning, Nehru wrote Mountbatten that the plan he had previewed frightened him. Much that we had done so far was undermined, and the cabinet mission scheme and subsequent developments were set aside, and an entirely new picture presented, a picture of fragmentation and conflict and disorder, and of a worsening of relations between India and Britain. If my reactions were so powerful, you can well imagine what my colleagues and others will think and feel. It will be a disaster. Mountbatten reported Nehru's bombshell to Ismay, suggesting that in view of this reaction, some redrafting of the plan would be required. At this point, Attlee asked Mountbatten to fly home unless he preferred having Cripps, Alexander, or the new Secretary of State, Lord Listowel, fly out to New Delhi to consult with him on the spot. Mountbatten chose to go to London. Before flying from New Delhi in mid-May, Mountbatten showed his revised proposed plan to Liaquat. I then asked him whether the Muslim League was going to accept partition of the Punjab and Bengal, to which he replied, "We shall never agree to it, but you may make us bow to the inevitable." I told him it was essential that if it did become inevitable, all parties should give their public agreement to avoid bloodshed, and that I proposed to raise this with Jinnah. Jinnah's reaction to the Mountbatten plan was even more negative than Nehru's. The Muslim League cannot agree to the partition of Bengal and the Punjab, Jinnah wrote. It cannot be justified historically, economically, geographically, politically, or morally. These provinces have built up their respective lives for nearly a century, and the only ground which is put forward for the partition is that the areas where the Hindus and Sikhs are in a majority should be separated from the rest of the provinces. The results will be disastrous for the life of these two provinces and all the communities concerned. If you take this decision, which is my opinion, will be a fateful one, Calcutta should not be torn away from the eastern Bengal. If worst comes to worst, Calcutta should be made a free port. At 10 Downing Street, on the evening of May 19, 1947, Mountbatten informed Prime Minister Attlee and his cabinet colleagues that it had become clear that the Muslim League would resort to arms if Pakistan in some form were not conceded. Jinnah was interviewed by Reuters the next day and demanded an 800-mile-long corridor to link West and East Pakistan, promising a really beneficial relationship between Pakistan and Britain and offering Hindustan a friendly and reciprocal alliance. Congress reactions to the corridor demand proved so strongly negatives that it never became a serious issue, receiving even less attention than the idea that Calcutta should emerge as a free port. Then Jinnah wired the cabinet demanding that before Bengal and the Punjab were partitioned, a referendum should be held in each province to determine the will of its people in this vital regard. Mountbatten, however, spoke against that proposal, insisting it would merely result in delay. The cabinet agreed, and the imperial steamroller moved ahead in high gear. Krishna Menon flew to London to inform Mountbatten on May 21st that Nehru and Patel were ready to accept Dominion status if it were offered to India in 1947. As I am anxious that there should be no misunderstanding, I am writing to you even though I have seen you this morning. Nehru's confidant wrote Mountbatten from India House the same day. If Mr. Jinnah wants a total separation and that straight away, and if we agree to it for the sake of peace and dismember our country, we want to be rid of him so far as the affairs of what is left to us of our own country are concerned. I feel sure you will appreciate this, and also that it is not a matter of detail, but is fundamental. Congress had begun to fear that in another 6 months they would lose the eastern Punjab and Sikh support, as well as Calcutta and western Bengal, possibly more of the princely states also, especially Hyderabad and Bhopal. For the longer Jinnah argued, the stronger and greater his demands became. Nehru was sick and tired of arguing, ready, as he put it, privately to concede to Pakistan on the theory that by cutting off the head, we will get rid of the headache. Attlee's final hurdle remained Churchill and the Conservative opposition in Parliament, who could easily held up the Independence of India Bill in a prolonged and acrimonious Commons debate that would have made transfer of power in 1947 impossible. Mountbatten went round to visit Mr. Churchill in bed and soothed the ex-Prime Minister's anxieties and fears with his fatal charm. He understood the forensic powers of this cigar-smoking old man who looked so deceptively frail in his sick bed. I then asked him if he would advise me how I should proceed if Jinnah was intransigent. Mountbatten reported he thought about this for a long time and finally said, "To begin with, you must threaten. Take away all British officers. Give them military units without British officers. Make it clear to them how impossible it would be to run Pakistan without British help." Mountbatten agreed to try and follow some such policy, but more important, he actually managed to get Churchill to give him a personal message for Jinnah, stating, "This is a matter of life or death for Pakistan, if you do not accept this offer with both hands." Churchill's words carried more weight with Jinnah than those of any other living person, as Mountbatten well knew. The final obstacle was now removed from the path to partition. With Churchill on board, it was full ahead for the Mountbatten plan, which was to bring two moth-eaten, wretched, impoverished, embattled, bitter new dominions into the British Commonwealth. On Monday morning, June 2nd, 1947, India's leaders drove into the North Court of the Viceroy's house in New Delhi. Liaquat and Nishtar accompanying Jinnah, Patel and G.B. Kripalani, Congress President for the year, and Baldev Singh and with Nehru. That meeting, at which those leaders were briefed on the plan brought back from London, lasted only 2 hours. The atmosphere was tense, reported Mountbatten, and I got the feeling that the less the leaders talked, the less the chance of friction and perhaps the ultimate breakdown of the meeting. I reported on the most helpful attitude of His Majesty's government and the opposition. I asked the leaders to let me have their replies before midnight. Jinnah said he would come in person at 11 p.m. after they had seen their working committee. I kept back Jinnah after the meeting to impress on him that there could not be any question of a no from the League. That must have been when Mountbatten delivered Churchill's message. The Viceroy, by now thoroughly disenchanted with Gandhi, possibly thanks to an undelivered message from Churchill, wrote, "He may be a saint, but he seems also to be a disciple of Trotsky." The Mahatma arrived at Mountbatten's study door half an hour after the others had gone off to read their copies of the plan. It was Gandhi's day of silence, so he wrote his comments on bits of paper. Jinnah had also done some doodling that morning, leaving a scrap behind that seemed to show rockets, tennis rackets and balloons going up, and had Governor General written in quotes across the center page, the Quaid-e-Azam apparently enjoying the sight of his future title. At 11 o'clock that night, Jinnah came around. He spent half an hour conveying the protest of his working committee against the partition of the provinces. I then asked him straight out whether his working committee were going to accept the plan. He replied that they were hopeful. I then asked him whether he intended to accept it himself, to which he replied that he would support me personally and undertook to use his very best endeavors to get the All India Muslim League Council to accept. He had called an urgent meeting next Monday. I finally asked him whether he felt I would be justified in advising the Prime Minister to go ahead and make the announcement, to which he replied very firmly, yes. Mountbatten met to confer with his staff the next morning and reported his futile efforts to get Jinnah to accept the plan in writing, but no amount of pressure would make him agree prior to his council's meeting. Mountbatten then reminded Jinnah that the Congress party were terribly suspicious of this particular tactic, which he always used, whereby he waited until the Congress party had made a firm decision about some plan and then left himself the right to make whatever decision suited the Muslim League. Nothing Mountbatten could say would move him. If that is your attitude, then the leaders of the Congress party and Sikhs will refuse final acceptance at the meeting in the morning. Chaos will follow and you will lose your Pakistan, probably for good. What must be, was his only reaction as he shrugged his shoulders. Mr. Jinnah, I do not intend to let you wreck all the work that has gone into this settlement. Since you will not accept for the Muslim League, I will speak for them myself. I have only one condition, and that is that when I say at the meeting in the morning, Mr. Jinnah has given me assurances which I have accepted and which satisfy me. You will in no circumstances contradict that, and that when I look towards you, you will nod. Jinnah's reply to the proposition itself was a nod. The formal announcement was made on the night of June 3rd. Bhopal, Patiala and the Prime Ministers of a dozen major princely states joined the Viceroy in his Oval Office to get their copies of the plan before it was broadcast to the world. At 7 p.m., All India Radio carried the public announcement made first by the Viceroy, then followed by separate speeches from Nehru, Jinnah and Baldev Singh. The Viceroy announced, on February 20th, 1947, His Majesty's government announced their intention of transferring power. By June 1948, we had hoped that it would be possible for the major parties to cooperate. This hope has not been fulfilled. The procedure outlined below embodies the best practical method of ascertaining the wishes of the people to determine the authority or authorities to whom power should be transferred. Then followed a provincial and district breakdown of Pakistan with specifications as to how legislative assembly referenda would be held to decide by a simple majority for or against partition, provincial as well as national. To avoid delay, different provinces or parts of provinces would proceed independently, and the existing constituent assembly as well as the new constituent assembly, if formed, should proceed to frame constitutions. These bodies would be free to frame their own rules. His Majesty's government were now willing to anticipate the June of 1948 deadline and envisioned setting up an independent Indian government or governments by an even earlier date. Accordingly, His Majesty's government proposed introducing legislation during the current session for the transfer of power this year on a dominion status basis to one of two successor authorities according to the decisions taken as a result of this announcement, Mountbatten concluded. I am glad that I am afforded an opportunity to speak to you directly through this radio from New Delhi. Jinnah remarked that evening after Mountbatten and Nehru had finished their speeches. It is the first time, I believe, that a non-official has been afforded an opportunity to address the people through the medium of this powerful instrument on political matters. It augurs well, and I hope that in the future I shall have greater facilities to enable me to voice my views and opinions, which will reach you directly. Life warm rather than in the cold print of the newspapers. How pleased he must have been, how proud to be seated there, addressing millions of listeners, a veritable viceroy at long last. Jinnah's speech had a mollifying impact, and as one expert in League dialectic wishfully put it, this means peace. Mountbatten's press secretary was, however, more cautiously wise in assessment, noting Nehru's last words had been Jai Hind. Jinnah closed with Pakistan Zindabad, said in such a clipped voice that some startled listeners thought at first that he pronounced Pakistan's in the bag. On the morning of June 5th, Mountbatten met with the political leaders again round the Oval table in his office to discuss the administrative consequences of partition, using an official brief as their point of departure. Jinnah was at pains to explain that both states would be independent and equal in every way. Nehru pointed out that the whole basis of approach must be different. India was continuing in every way the same, but the fact that dissident provinces were being allowed to secede must not interrupt the work of the government of India or its foreign policy. Feeling was very tense. The last meeting of the All India Muslim League was held in New Delhi's magnificent Imperial Hotel on June 9th to 10th, 1947. Some 425 Muslim delegates gathered in that ornate grand ballroom overlooking the lush grounds, with their picket of royal palms distancing the hotel from the spacious King's Way outside. The hotel was one of those sumptuous islands of peace and quiet that long helped British residents in Delhi to survive with minimal pain. At first, it seemed that the League Council might also enjoy the tranquility of this civilized retreat during its historic deliberations on the Mountbatten plan of partition that hot June day. But not for long. Militant Muslim opposition from every province, orthodox mullahs, and mighty landed barons with the most to lose from the Punjab's partition, as well as mercantile magnates who hated the thought of giving Calcutta to their Hindu rivals, cried out angrily inside the ballroom against the plan, calling it betrayal and a tragedy for Pakistan. Khaksars rushed in through the once tranquil garden, entering the hotel lounge, brandishing belchas or sharpened spades, shouting, "Get Jinnah!" halfway up the staircase leading to the ballroom, where Jinnah and the council were in session before the League National Guard could grapple with them and turn them back. It took police with tear gas to bring the disturbance to an end. Some 50 Khaksars would-be assassins were arrested, and hotel guests in the lounge ran helter-skelter, while those in the dining hall sat down for their dinner with tearful eyes as the tear gas spread in the hall. Mr. Jinnah, however, continued the proceedings of the meeting untrampled by the disturbances on the ground floor. A few demonstrators who found their way into the meeting hall were soon ejected. On the top floor of the hotel, Muslim League National Guards and Khaksar demonstrators clashed, broke furniture, and smashed glass panes. A few persons sustained injuries, Morning News reported. Inside the grand ballroom, Jinnah was hailed as Shahenshah-e-Pakistan, literally Emperor of Pakistan, in the Persian style of Iran's monarch, but he was quick to disclaim that title, urging his supporters not to repeat it and insisting, "I am a soldier of Pakistan, not its emperor." Though the council met in camera, Vallabhbhai Patel sent a transcript of shorthand notes on the proceedings, presumably taken by a Congress spy, to Mountbatten soon after the meeting ended. The League's council gave full authority to President Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah to accept the fundamental principles of the plan as a compromise and to leave it to him with full authority to work out all the details of the plan in an equitable and just manner. That League resolution caused a howl of indignation from the Congress press and violent letters of protest from Nehru and Patel, who wrote Mountbatten to express fears that they would not be able to manage the All India Congress Committee in view of the failure of the League to make a definite announcement that they accepted the plan as a settlement. Muslim zealots were, however, even more outraged at how far from the original Pakistan demand Jinnah had gone towards accepting the plan, and Rahmat Ali's Pakistan National Movement in Cambridge now denounced it as the greatest betrayal to the whole Millat, Muslim community, writing, "It has now been completely betrayed, bartered, and dismembered by Mr. Jinnah, whose act of accepting the British plan shatters the foundation of all its nations and countries and sabotages the future of all its 100 million members living in the continent of Dunya. Unless nullified, it will forever cripple the life of the Pak nation, blight the existence of the millat in Dunya, and compromise the freedom of the fraternity throughout the world. We will carry on the fight to the end. We will never quit or capitulate. It shall never be read of us that when the time came to choose between the greatest battle for the millat and the greatest betrayal, we too followed the quislings and chose betrayal. Long live the millat." The first meeting of the interim government's cabinet following the announcement plan almost led to a fight between Nehru and Liaquat over Jawaharlal's appointment of his sister, Madame Pandit, to be an ambassador, at which point Mountbatten shouted, "Gentlemen, what hopes have we of getting a peaceable partition if the first discussion leads to such a disgraceful scene as this?" The answer, of course, was none.